Well, imagine a 78-year-old man who often speaks incoherently and lies to you in ways that leave you wondering whether he is a pathological liar or delusional or both, pocket dials someone he doesn't want to talk to at 1:28 a.m. And then imagine that same 78-year-old man is angrily braying at the world at 5:24 a.m., claiming people have committed crimes that do not exist, and coming up with a name for those people committing the crimes that don't exist, using words that have never been joined together and make absolutely no sense, calling them, quote, negative criminals. Of course, you would be concerned about the mental health of such a person. Of course, you would assume some kind of serious neurological decline in the 78-year-old man. Imagine that same 78-year-old man also said, I run the country and the world. And now, imagine if Joe Biden had done just one of those things. There would have been 4-inch headlines about cognitive decline. But that's just one news cycle with Donald Trump, who did every one of those things. He butt-dialed a reporter for The Atlantic at 1:28 a.m. who he did not want to talk to, but with whom he did eventually do an interview in which he said, I run the country and the world. No one runs the country. No one ever has. No one ever will. This country was founded on that very principle. This country was founded by people escaping the rule of one person, escaping the rule of a king. And so, no, the president does not run the country. The president, at best, if he knows what he's doing, runs a section and only a section of the federal government, the executive branch. The President of the United States has absolutely nothing to do with thousands upon thousands of state laws that exist in this country and city laws and all of the different state tax rates that exist in this country. People have tried to run the world, people like Adolf Hitler, but no one ever has. And so, no, Donald Trump does not run the country and the world. And it sounds fully delusional when he says it in an interview with The Atlantic, which now carries that line as the title of the piece. I run the country and the world. Some Republicans have tried to justify that delusional declaration by invoking the concept of the President of the United States as the leader of the free world. That is a cliche that I have never personally indulged in, but it really is just a cliche, and it's never actually been true. And no previous president, all of whom since Franklin Delano Roosevelt have at some point been referred to in the media as the leader of the free world, has never claimed that title for himself. No president has ever done that, because every previous president who actually tried to lead other countries in one direction or another always knew that the easiest way to destroy a president's ability to lead other countries in this world, to cooperate with us, would be a publicly expressed sense of American presidential superiority over all of those countries and over all of those leaders of those countries who the American president might be trying to persuade. And so Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who brilliantly managed the allied countries who won World War II, and Joe Biden, who brilliantly managed the alliance of countries who have rushed to the support of Ukraine, always publicly did that kind of leadership with humility, because that's the only way. The man who says, I run the world, is being rebuked literally by the world right now and every single day since he has imposed tariffs on the world. Not one country has accepted those tariffs. Not one country isn't fighting back against those tariffs. And China, the principal target of the Trump tariffs, through a government spokesperson, said, "We will fight till the end." That's how much Donald Trump does not run the world. Donald Trump started a trade war that he is losing every day. Donald Trump could not have chosen a stupider or more delusional moment to say, "I run the country and the world." As of tonight, new polling indicates the country doesn't want Donald Trump running anything now. Donald Trump has achieved a new record, and all of Donald Trump's records are the most extreme form of negative achievement. A new Washington Post poll awards a record to Donald Trump, reporting that Donald Trump's job approval rating is, quote, lower than for any past president at the 100-day mark in their first or second terms. Donald Trump is now America's biggest loser in the history of first 100-day presidential polling. 55% say they disapprove of how Donald Trump is handling his job, and only 39% approve. Donald Trump won 49% of the vote in the last election, but he couldn't come close to that now. The only comfort for Donald Trump in this week's new round of polling is that the richest person in the world polls just slightly worse than Donald Trump. 57% disapprove of what Elon Musk is doing, with just 35% approving. Americans think that the Trump-invented so-called Department of Government Efficiency, allegedly run by Elon Musk, isn't finding waste or fraud in government. 56% say that waste has either stayed the same or has increased, compared to 43% who think it has decreased. And 68% say that fraud has either stayed the same or has increased. Donald Trump, speaking of fraud, is the first president of the United States to try to hustle private business ventures from the White House and do it publicly, auctioning off for money that he can put in his pocket, not for campaign contributions, dinners at the White House, creating his own cryptocurrency coin business. No president has ever tried to profit from the presidency while in the White House. 59% expressed concern that Donald Trump is doing too much to reduce the size and role of government, with 56% saying correctly that Donald Trump acted beyond his authority as president without justification. That's what's happening in the country that Donald Trump says he runs. 56% are saying Donald Trump is trying to act beyond his authority as president, and that 56% understand that no one is supposed to run this country. That is not the definition of the presidency that a majority of this country correctly embraces, or that the Constitution provides for. Donald Trump does run his private businesses. He still does every day. He runs them for profit from the White House. But he does not run the country, and he absolutely does not run the world. It's not just every other country in the world that knows how harmful the Trump tariffs are. A huge majority of Americans know that. 64% disapprove of Donald Trump's tariffs. The Washington Post calls it one of the least popular issues so far in Trump's presidency. 64% of the people in this country know that Donald Trump's tariffs are a very bad idea. 72% say they think it's very or somewhat likely that his economic policies will cause a recession. 72% say Donald Trump is on his way to causing a recession, and it's very, very hard in modern American politics to get polling numbers like 72% on anything. And it is virtually impossible to get polling numbers like 89%. Only something as obviously deranged as the Trump tariffs could produce that kind of number in a poll. 89% think the Trump tariffs are likely to result in higher prices on the products they buy. 89% are saying in that poll they know Donald Trump lied every single time he told them during the presidential campaign that China would pay his tariffs. 89% are saying they know Donald Trump was lying when he said the tariffs that he will impose will be paid by Canada and paid by Mexico and by all the foreign countries he illegally imposes tariffs on, claiming that it's a national security issue, which it obviously isn't. Tonight, 89% know the man who claims to run the country and the world is completely wrong about who actually pays the Trump tariffs. They understand exactly what all those radio and TV ads from car dealers are about, telling them to rush in to get the pre-tariff price on a new car. And they know time is running out or has run out for that pre-tariff price. And they're going to pay that tariff if they buy a new car. At 5:24 a.m. today, the man who thinks he runs the country and the world reacted to the Washington Post poll by, of course, attacking the poll and calling the people who conduct the poll, quote, his words, negative criminals. Donald Trump said, these people should be investigated for election fraud. They are negative criminals. And so, as ragingly unconstitutional, delusional rants by presidents go, Donald Trump is once again the big winner because no other president has really had a public, ragingly unconstitutional, delusional comment about anything. Donald Trump said in writing that the people who conduct the Washington Post poll should be investigated for election fraud, should be investigated for a crime. That should be a criminal investigation. Okay, that means his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, should be in the middle of that investigation right now, tonight. That also means someone's going to have to completely rewrite the law on election fraud to make accurate polling illegal, which, of course, a little thing that Donald Trump has never comprehended, the First Amendment, will not allow. There isn't another president in history who thought that anyone working at the Washington Post was a criminal. Richard Nixon knew that Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein were on track in their investigative reporting in 1973 and 1974 to destroy the Nixon presidency and drive him out of office, which is exactly what they did. And Richard Nixon never called either one of them a criminal. Never. Richard Nixon never thought Woodward and Bernstein were criminals. Richard Nixon knew exactly who the criminals were. Richard Nixon knew the criminals were working for him. Richard Nixon knew he was a criminal. Richard Nixon knew the White House counsel was a criminal. Richard Nixon knew his Attorney General was a criminal. Richard Nixon knew his White House Chief of Staff was a criminal. And they were all found to be criminals in federal court except Richard Nixon, who received a presidential pardon a month after he resigned the presidency for all the crimes he committed during his presidency. Remember when the Trump team was promising 90 trade deals in 90 days, around the world in 90 days, solve the problem? Because the man who believes he runs the world was going to fix everything himself.
We're going to run 90 deals in 90 days is possible. The boss is going to be the chief negotiator. Nothing's done without him looking very carefully at it. He has such a fine attention to detail.
It's impossible to get more clownish than that man. That was 17 days ago. Do we have 17 trade deals? No. How many do we have? Zero. Exactly zero. 17 days and zero trade deals is what he meant to say. Donald Trump suggested that China would be begging for a trade deal. The president of China would immediately pick up the phone and call Donald Trump. The president of China hasn't done that. And Donald Trump is still trying to claim that negotiations on a trade deal with China, which would be the single most complex trade deal ever negotiated with a single country in the history of the world, is actually happening. A trade deal like that normally takes years. And China says nothing's happening. China says there are no negotiations. Now, imagine the president of China and everyone in the Chinese government watching Donald Trump publicly demonstrate just how weak he is compared to them by lying about them. Donald Trump is claiming that there are negotiations going on with China because Americans, as shown in those polls, hate his tariffs. The Chinese government has the luxury of not caring what anyone outside the government thinks of this trade war. The president of China doesn't run the world, but he sure does run China. And so President Xi doesn't have to worry about public opinion the way Donald Trump does. That's why President Xi hasn't budged, and Donald Trump has. The Wall Street Journal editorial board says China called Mr. Trump's bluff and seems to have won this round. In a new article titled "Trump's Tariffs Have Done What No U.S. Adversary Could," Branko Marcelik writes, "The blanket, erratic, and often nonsensical nature of the tariffs has, far from showing signs of jumpstarting the long process of reshoring manufacturing jobs, actually proven a major obstacle to that project, while also leading manufacturers to shed jobs or scale back their plans and plunging the entire U.S. economy into uncertainty more broadly." This reached a crescendo with the mass sell-off of U.S. Treasury bonds earlier this month that briefly threatened to send the entire U.S. financial system buckling. Trump, in other words, has not just inadvertently demonstrated the extent of the United States' dependence on China, he has also wound up demonstrating other key nations' similar dependence while revealing stark limits to Washington's ability to make even its allies do what it wants. So much for the man who says, "I run the country and the world." The guy who claims he runs the world has not been able to negotiate a single trade deal with a single country in the world since promising 90 deals in 90 days. That makes Donald Trump, according to his own definition of success in this arena, the biggest loser in international trade in the history of the American presidency, and no amount of delusional screaming about Donald Trump's negative criminals can change what Donald Trump has done to make himself such a humiliated worldwide loser.